right, welcome everybody. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Jez. I'm the programming librarian here at the Elmhurst Public Library. I'm going to mention a couple of upcoming programs and a couple of things about tonight, and then we'll get started. So next week, Wednesday at 7 p.m., we have Debating Independence, the American Revolution in 1776. So historian Joyce Hallworth will be here and talking to us about how in early 1776, most Americans thought that independence was a terrible idea and that we should reconcile with Great Britain. But just a few months later, they had all changed their mind. And what had caused that? Why did they change their mind? How did we get to where we are now, almost 250 years later? Next year is I can't remember what it's called, the 250th. So we'll have that coming up next week. On, let's see, Tuesday at 7 p.m., we have Summer Stories with Green Man Theater. So the storytellers from Green Man Theater will be here, and they're going to be talking about different stories about summer and outdoor activities, and we can live vicariously through those when we don't want to go outside because it's too hot. So they will be here, and that's in person and online, as is tonight's program. So if you are online, know that we're using the webinar format. It means you can see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. If you have any questions or issues, put those in the chat or the Q&A, or call the reference desk upstairs if you're having trouble connecting. Here in person, I can hear you. So if you can turn off cell phones, watches, whatever else might go off. And if you need to get up for any reason, just do so without disturbing those around you. I'll close the door in just a moment here. In person, we have both of our assistive listening systems. So if you would like to borrow one of our devices, I have them on the table back there. It's a pair of headphones, brings the sound close to your ear, gives you a little bit more control over it. And if you have the Listen Everywhere app on your phone or connected to your hearing aid, you can connect to that through the meeting room Wi-Fi, not the general library one. Online, we have enabled the closed captioning. So if you would like to see that, you'll click the CC button or more and click Show Captions. And then I think that's all we've got for that. So I'm going to close the door. For those of you in person, if you did not get a ticket and you want a ticket, come see me in the back. We'll put you in for the drawing for that poster. And without further ado, I'm going to welcome Justin from the exhibit. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Is this thing working? Okay. My name's Justin Witte. I'm the curator of the Cleve Carney Museum of Art and a curator of the College of DuPage. And I am here to talk to you not only about the exhibition, Hokusai and Ukiyo-e, the floating world, but also give you some insight into the production of this type of exhibition at a community college. So I think it's a fascinating story and adds to the overall story. And I'm also going to share the fascinating kind of travels this work took to find itself here in DuPage County, because that story is also very interesting. If you have questions as I'm going through, feel free to raise your hand and we can address them, because I know sometimes something comes across your mind, you forget about it later on. And that way I can fill more space with you talking and I can talk less. So, you know, I don't have to reveal myself as an imposter. So what we're looking at here is the lake behind the Mackinac Art Center at the College of DuPage. And in May of this year, it was a very busy time for myself and my team. I think from the opening of the exhibition prior to that, I counted and I was at work 42 days straight, 10 to 12-hour days with our team putting this exhibition together. And it was a lot of work because we're transforming unusual spaces. The large lobby area at the Mackinac Art Center, if you're familiar, we turned that into an exhibition. Our theater team was building a whole Edo village in the Playhouse Theater. I was working with 2D design to create a manga exhibition. All that's going on. Then on top of it, I knew at the end of this period, a bunch of Italians were going to show up with valuable Japanese artwork, and we had to deal with them. And usually when you hear a bunch of Italians showing up in that way, that it wasn't threatening. It just meant that there was a lot of pressure. And I say all that because one of the things I would do each morning to kind of get ready for the day is I would intentionally park farther away from the art center, and I would walk through the prairies that are behind the college, the Russell R. Kirk prairies, because it's just kind of a moment to center myself, get ready for work. And towards the end of the exhibition preparation, this guy showed up, right? And this is a heron, or I believe it's a heron, this is a great egret. Don't dare say it's a heron. Don't dare. Luckily, I'm not claiming any knowledge in that area. So this great egret showed up, and it was a very kind of key moment for me, because as I had been walking through this prairie, a lot of what I'd been seeing and experiencing was starting to reflect itself in the work we had started to put up and share for this exhibition. And it was especially interesting because just the day prior, I'd been deciding on which drawings by Hokusai to put through in different parts of the exhibition. And he had all sorts of birds, probably some herons too. Yeah, and also great egrets. Yeah, and a crane and other birds as well. But that I started to feel this connection with the work, not only because it was important, but it started to reflect really this world I was experiencing as I was walking through that prairie. And really, I just want to go back one. And really that's tied into a lot of this work, even though it was some of it over 300 years old, seemed incredibly vibrant and contemporary and present. We're looking at a wall from the exhibition inside the Cleve Carney Museum of Art of works by Utagawa Hiroshige. And he is one of the artists kind of the tail end of the Ukiyo-e period, which I'll explain more of in a minute. But when you look at these prints, and these are woodblock prints in this part of the exhibition, even though this is from 1855, if you think of 1855 in like American art, right? We're thinking very stiff portraits, right? Dramatic lighting, kind of very classical landscapes. And this was being made in Japan. And there's something so energetic and lively and kind of lifelike to it. Now, part of the reason is because of the form that they were using, right? Woodblock prints. Who knows much about woodblock printing? Just a few. Okay. So a lot of people imagine, we say this artist did woodblock prints. They imagine them in their studio with a piece of wood. They're making the print. They print it one. It's real easy. It's actually a very complex process. So the artists like Utagawa Hiroshige would draw out on very thin paper the designs for the artwork. He'd create the artwork, and then that would be passed off to a carver who would then carve through the paper so they could see the drawing into wood each block. And for each different color that you saw printed, with the exceptions of those kind of faded colors, would be a different wood block, right? So what that means is when you look at some of the detail in these, and these are about this big, right? All of these little lines were carved out of wood. Now, what I say, why does that make it so kind of contemporary or relevant? I think it required a certain sort of precision and editing of use of line and shape, right? So it was very realistic, but at the same time, very graphic. And a lot of people reacted to this, right? And still reacted to this. In fact, Utagawa Hiroshige is probably even more well-known than Hokusai among artists, okay? And he was actually named in the late 1800s by Beaux Arts in Paris as one of the most influential artists in the world. And there's a reason for that, okay? So we're looking at the tail end of a period in Japan that Japan was largely closed off from the rest of the world, from basically like the beginning of the 1600s till about 1853, right? Japan was shut off from the rest of the world, intentionally so. They had some trading with the Dutch, but it was very limited and controlled. And after that period, which was kind of forcefully initiated by the Americans, kind of forcefully going to the port and and politely asking them to open up their port to the rest of the world. The goods and artworks that had been created in Japan in a period of isolation from what was going on elsewhere kind of flooded the global market. And because it had developed on its own for so long, people were seeing designs, compositions, color use that was very different than what they were used to, right? A lot of stacked spaces, not as much traditional Western perspective, bright, vivid colors, depiction of kind of everyday scenes like this river crossing. It's hard to believe that was every day. I mean, I think that would be like a tourist attraction now, but it was everyday type thing. And some of the people that saw these were artists such as Vincent van Gogh, right? In fact, Vincent van Gogh's first master copy, that means a painting intentionally done of another artist to learn from them, was of a Hiroshige print. And Van Gogh stated he was one of his favorite and most influential artists. What's even more fascinating, they weren't seeing these prints because there was a big exhibition. No, what was so popular in Europe and the rest of the world is people wanted like Japanese objects, right? Like cups and kind of writing sets, beautiful objects, beautifully decorated objects. And when those shipped, oftentimes, they would break. So you would need to kind of support them. Well, since wood blocks were made in multiples, certain ones there was a large variety of them. So you could just bunch them up, maybe take a sketchbook of them, put them in there so whatever was shipped over to Europe wouldn't break. And one of the stories goes that it's one of those sketchbooks, actually Hokusai's came through in one of these shipments. And that started to spread around artists and started to influence and really direct the Impressionist movement in Europe. So that's one reason it seems so familiar and kind of contemporary, because it's so influential in defining one of the major art movements in our history, in Western history. I think another reason is the popularity of these has continued with slight lulls during World War II. Of this work has continued worldwide since the country opened up. And it's found its way into a lot of popular culture. And I think another thing we recognize when we see this, it looks like comic books, right? Or it looks like anime movies because of that succinct line, the way it's printed on these, what we would have like in a comic book would be newsprint, but here like rice paper, it has that quality, and that is a visual language we're used to. So right away, when you encounter this work, not only is it depicting this nature and this world that's very evident when I was walking through the back of the art center, but also I was really making these connections with a visual language that we've become very familiar with and surrounded by. And there's two more reasons, I think, that less obvious visual reasons that they are so familiar. And there's something fascinating and relatable about them. And the first one, I'll use these Hiroshige prints. So these are all from a series he did of famous views of 60-odd provinces. So one thing you should know about this period of isolation in Japan, it was also a relatively peaceful period. Before that period, there was a lot of fighting within the country between different sections of people fighting for power. So it brought in a relative amount of calm, and it was also fairly prosperous for the merchant class, the middle class. So you had this growing middle section of wealth. And we all know, even from the US, when you have that, that really helps lift the entire economy, right? See, look what happened in the US from the 40s up until today. And as that happened, a series of roads would be able to be built and highways between what were called highways then, between the major cities in Japan that had not existed before. Ostensibly for trade, but then also people had money and time, so there started to be travel. There started to be tourism. And along these paths between cities, there became famous spots of natural beauty or kind of interesting viewpoints. There's actually one print that's not in the show, but it's on the back side of one of the prints that we have that is a view of a tree that's kind of grown in a circle that perfectly highlights a landscape across the river, and that was a famous viewpoint too. So Hiroshige, like a lot of artists at the time, really needed to make money. These were really like working class artists, right? There was not this thing, there was no kind of like a Jeff Koons, Andy Warhol type artist. There wasn't self-referential. It's like, what do we make that the people would like? And oftentimes they would get suggestions from their publishers. And two things were very popular. Mount Fuji was very popular, but also these tourist spots. So these prints were actually meant to either commemorate your trip to these locations or to serve as a way to visit them if you weren't able to afford to travel. And that's also familiar because that's how we operate with images in our world, right? Think postcards, like this is the postcards of a road trip from the 1850s in Japan. The other really key thing about his, I just want to pause for a second, is this. I want you to pay attention to these vivid colors because as I talk, we're going to kind of go back in time through the work in the show. So keep in mind how vivid these colors are, and we'll discuss why that is. Before I move on from him, a few interesting facts about Hiroshige, who's very well represented in our exhibition. He was born into a family of samurai, and he actually became the fire warden of the Edo castle. And that turned out to be a pretty cush gig. Didn't have to do that much unless there was a fire. Then he would probably be very busy. And that allowed him time to begin drawing, painting, and becoming an artist. He went on to be one of the most prolific artists in the history of Japan, creating over 8,000 works. But at the end of his life, he kind of gave it all up and became a monk. Very interesting figure. I already talked about his influence. But another reason, there's another great piece by his. Now, there's another reason that these works, especially later, seem so familiar, and a lot of that's encapsulated in this work. So this is Hokusai, the Great Wave off Kanagawa, also known as Under the Wave off Kanagawa, or the Great Wave. The direct Japanese translation doesn't directly translate to English. It means something like inside of the wave, or through the wave. It's not a direct translation, so you'll see slightly different titles in different areas. It looks like a tsunami, but that's one of the misconceptions about it. It's actually not a tsunami wave. But that is a great observation because there is a lot of this wave that is misunderstood. Even though this is one of the most recognizable, most famous images in the world. In fact, if you all pull out your phones and type in wave, the emoji suggestion that comes up is this image. I think it's the only famous artwork that is an emoji, right? I don't know how he would feel about that or how you feel about it. I also say this is probably the artwork that's most tattooed on the backs of your friends and neighbors. They just don't want to tell you, okay? So it's very well known, but when we see it, what do we see tsunami, right? We see this great wave crashing in, and we think it's crashing down on these fishermen going out to sea. Now, there's a few things I want to point out that really should change that perspective, right? One, researchers have looked at these type of boats, and these are often boats used between towns for people to travel between towns in Japan. So these individuals are actually traveling intentionally between towns along the coast of Japan. And while we read this as left to right, where we come in where there's this giant menacing wave with its kind of finger-like foam about to crash down on it, it's important to remember that in Japan, they read both text and imagery right to left. Now, I think that that's sometimes hard to overstate how big of a difference that really is, because we're so trained to look at things that way. So even subconsciously, we look at it, first thing we see is wave, massive wave, pushing down. We follow the wave. Okay, what's it pushing down on? These people. It's a moment of imminent danger, right, of catastrophe. But if you try to read it right to left, first thing you see is the figures in the boats kind of swooping by, and you'll notice they're actually going alongside of the wave. This one's farther back. So they are traveling past the wave. So even though it is a threatening sea, there is a sense that they are actually safe and know how to navigate that sea. And why else do we know that it is safe? Because of this. What is this? Mount Fuji. Hokusai created this print as part of his 36 Views of Mount Fuji, which is a series of prints he made in his 70s to try to regain some of his fortunes after having gone broke because of his son-in-law's gambling. Just slip that in there. He also had a great studio fire where he lost a lot of his artwork, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And he went to his publisher and said, I really need to make some money. What do people like? And he's like, everyone loves Mount Fuji. You got to do Mount Fuji. So he ended up doing the series, 36 Views, which actually ended up being much more than 36 views. And Mount Fuji in Japanese culture is viewed as a type of deity, right? Not a deity in the same sense you would think of as like an all-seeing, controlling entity, kind of like a Christian deity, but instead more of like that it has a spirit and a role in culture, and that is of protection, of peace, and of calm, right? And so the idea that it is present in this picture is a suggestion, not only a reference to their being at peace with nature, but they're being protected by Mount Fuji. So that's the side aspect of it. Now back to why there's a certain familiarity in this work or something that seems so contemporary about it. This is the piece that's in our exhibition from the Kiyosone Museum. And it's a little different than ones you may have seen, right? Other versions you may have seen have maybe a pink sky, little different colors in the front. So this goes back to the publishers. The publishers often, once woodblock prints were made, decided to print different versions in different colors based on what was popular. And one of the most popular things about this image, and indeed a lot of the works in the 36 Views of Mount Fuji, was this color blue. A lot of the blues in early ukiyo-e woodblock prints and Japanese prints would fade very quickly. It wasn't that rich because it was naturally based pigment. So it was created using natural ingredients. Through that limited trade that they actually had with the Dutch, I'm of Dutch background, so I'm very proud of this fact. And I love that there's some Delft influence here. Way to go, Hokusai. They introduced Prussian blue, which is a synthetic blue. So that means it's very vivid and it doesn't fade, right? But it was expensive. So the use of it was kind of a status symbol and a show of like value. So if a publisher did a series of all blue prints or highly blue prints, it was kind of a flex. Like, look at all this blue I got. You got to think of it almost like, I think we're all old enough to remember when flat screen TVs came out, right? And it was like a plasma screen. People would pay like $8,000 for a plasma screen, which seems insane now. But almost think of this blue as that same sort of element they were kind of showing off. So this print was actually done intentionally just in blues, right? So it's monochromatic that way. But there's also something different than what you'll see in some of the earlier works I show you as we go back in time in the exhibition, is that we're also seeing the influence of the West on this picture. So even though they tried to restrict access to the West through the trading with certain Western imagery and methods of perspective were introduced to artists through that trade. So they had a sense of linear perspective, of atmospheric perspective, of how Western artists use scale to mimic space in their work, which was different to how work was being created in Japan. And we see that here, right? The small Mount Fuji in the back, even though it's an eye line, we know that gives it a sense of deep space, right? There is atmospheric perspective. Atmospheric perspective means creating a sense of distance through the like slight obscuring or fading of things in the distance, just how they might disappear, fade in real life, right? So you see that influence, and at the same time, we know that shortly after this was made and discovered, this went on to be one of the most popular images of its time and to this day. So we have a moment where the world, culture of the world is opening up and starting to influence each other, right? This work would not be possible without the Prussian blue, without the influence of the perspective from the West, and our art would not be the same if not for the introduction of pieces like this that kind of really crashed over the world. And so it was the beginning of this global cultural exchange that we are still in now. So there's something very fresh about that as well. Now, a lot of people, when they come see the piece, which in life is about this big, right? And they come in and like, oh my gosh, where's the real one? That is the real one. Wait, isn't there a big one? No. Did he paint it first? No, it was always a woodblock print. It was made to be multiples right away. And the reason they were those scale is because it was easier when people shared their artwork, especially woodblock prints, they wouldn't have them on their walls. Artworks you'd have on the wall would be like a hanging scroll, right? Prints you would share either through books or bring them out as prints to share when you had guests over. So it was a very intimate sharing experience. And it was much more about viewing a story together, like watching television or reading a book. It was consumed in a different way than like being looked up on the wall. So it was of that scale. And it's also easier to kind of print and also sell things that size. So there is always a lot of confusion because we almost always see it this big or bigger now, right? But remember, that is the actual size, which is actually a greater testament to those woodblock printers. Now, we talked a little bit about Hiroshige Hokusai was also a fascinating figure. And the reason his name is in the title of the exhibition is because we found that his story was a wonderful line through this period and showed a lot of the different styles, and also was a fascinating artist story to kind of bring you into this world of Japanese works and ukiyo-e artists. So he became an artist very young. Age 14, he was already working as a woodblock apprentice. So he right away working to be an artist. Throughout his life, he changed his name over 30 times. Okay, he wasn't worried about Italians coming. The reason he changed his name is because artist names were like advertisements. If you went and worked with a specific artist and learned their style, once you achieved the style correctly, you would be allowed to take on the name of that artist or that studio. So I often say is like, so say you went and worked at, if I went and worked at Walmart and I want people to know that, I've changed my name to Justin Walmart, but then I transferred to Target, but I wanted people to know I had the experience of working at Walmart, I would then be Justin Walmart Target. And then if I eventually ended up at IKEA, you would know me as Justin Walmart Target IKEA, or Justin Target IKEA, formerly of Walmart. And essentially those were why his names changed so much, okay? Because, or if he broke away from a studio and started his own studio, he would then make a new name. So it was more like a branding. So people could see within the name the style they were going to get, understand who it was. And it wasn't until he was in his 40s that he actually started using the name Hokusai. A lot of other interesting things. It's rumored that he had over 94 houses and that he would keep them until they got dirty and then he would move on. I kind of like that. I think that would be an interesting. I don't recommend it, not in this mark, especially in Elmhurst. That might be hard to do. But it shows that he was this kind of eccentric figure. But his work was also incredibly popular. But like many artists who were very hand to mouth, like when his prints were selling good, when his paintings were selling good, he was doing well, and then he wasn't doing well. As I mentioned, when he was later in life, his daughter moved in with him, and because her husband had left him, and his grandson was a gambler and went into a great deal of debt and actually bankrupted them. He and his daughter had to move into a temple. Right around that time, there was a fire in his studio where he lost much of his work. And then not too long away from that, he was also struck by lightning. In which once again he changed his name to recognize that moment. Always an opportunist. He was also quite a showman, so he would do these large events where he would do large ink paintings. Famously, one of a famous monk, where he would advertise them. Come see Hokusai paint the Dharma on this large like 20-foot surface in the town square, wherever it was, on this date, and they still have examples of these flyers. So he would do these performative acts. He famously did that twice. But we know him from that later work that was created really as a chance to recreate his wealth. He left a great legacy, influenced a great number of artists of his time. But one of the key things he did is he discovered that people really like to see his drawings, right? So he would do tons of drawings of everything, of nature, like I showed in the beginning, of his surroundings, but also wildly imaginative drawings telling folklores or tales or imagining wild creatures or beasts. He would do waves or clouds. And he started to publish these drawings, right? And they were done in woodblock prints and books, and they were called manga. That is how the name began, exactly. So manga now is known as what's referred to as Japanese comic books is called that. And his idea was to share images of everything that people could learn from and look at and use for their education. But he did over 15 editions of different books and sold hundreds and thousands of copies. And that's really why he also became so well known, because those were so widespread and ubiquitous. And also, a lot of times, like the 36 Views of Mount Fuji were also published in books that people would also get. So I think those are some of the reasons why he's such a fascinating story. And what we're looking at here is actually in part of the lobby at the Mackinac Art Center, where Julia Walker, our assistant curator, and myself created an exhibition that tells the background of Edo, Japan, which is that period in Japan I was talking about. Edo is the name for Tokyo, and it was made the cultural center of the country at that time. Talks about Hokusai, the origins of Ukiyo-e, woodblock print. And the back wall, the long wall, there's a long timeline that tells all about Hokusai and kind of the quirky aspects of his life. And that shelf, all these drawings you see are pulled from different parts of his sketchbooks. And here's another bird. I'm not going to say what kind of bird it is because I don't want to get in trouble. So, all right. I think you're right. I think you're good. You're good with the birds. So here's a view of that lobby exhibit. So normally this is a waiting area for our shows in the Belushi Theater. And I wanted to create a space that was open, but also could create kind of private little coves that you could go in and learn about specific things. So you can see on the inside, there's different information as you go through. And if you go, or when you go to this exhibition, there's no one way to go through it. Each little wall section is meant to be read on its own, so you can just kind of flow through that space. And then I was also thinking about the height of the space, because it is a beautiful tall space. We don't often think of those higher walls. And there's a famous print by Hokusai of a red Mount Fuji that's actually more famous in Japan than the wave. And at the top of that, there are these kind of very thin, pencil-thin clouds. And so I took an adaptation of those and created this clouds that wrap around the center of the art center. So I wanted it in combination with the blow up of this large print to feel like you're inside of one of his woodblock prints. And it's important that when we do these exhibitions, we want to give context. Here's a section on woodblock printing that explains. So this is inside of one of those coves. Because when you do enter the Cleve Carney Museum, which is in the Art Center, why is this not cooperating? It's because I'm a Mac person and it knows it. There we go. So when you enter the museum where we have the actual collection on show, you have this background of information. So this is a view of inside the museum. And I was talking so far about woodblock prints that we have in the exhibit. It's also important to know that we have a large number of hand-painted hanging scrolls and scrolls. And why that's important is because while the prints are so famous and fascinating, they were always made as multiples, right? There's different versions of them. How many? We don't know. One thing I wanted to mention about the wave, it's the most famous, most studied print probably in history. And publishers didn't do like marked editions at that time. You know, they didn't do in the corner like 1 of 20 signed like someone would now with an art print. But researchers have really studied the prints just of the wave, not of all prints, and they can really tell like, oh, at this point, that line around the box around the signature gets thinner. And that's because the wood block has been used so much time, it's deteriorated. And when they notice a clear change, they label it as a state. Okay? So the print you're seeing in the show is first edition, because it's the actual woodblock print made in his time in that era. It's that age. It's made from the carving that was made from his drawing, but it's the third state. What that means is there's a third change noticed by experts in the deterioration of the woodblock. There's the first state is the rarest. That's the Art Institute has 3 from the first state. The one we have is from the third state. But probably much more rare than the wave that we have in this exhibition is we have 2 hand-painted scrolls by Hokusai. Here you see one on the right, and there's one in the back room. And the reason these are so rare, one, is because they're hand-painted. Like, so by any painting, it is a one-of-a-kind, incredibly detailed. But also, what did I mention happened to Hokusai's studio, right? A lot of his works were lost. And there's just fewer of these. So people may come in looking for the wave, but when you talk to our partners in Italy or other people who come in with experts, that these are really probably 2 of the most rare and important pieces in the show. On the left, excuse me for the typo, is a portrait of poet Kakenomoto Hitomaro. And then on the right is a beautiful scroll, the 3 courtesans from the 3 capitals. So 3 courtesans, one representing each of the major cities in Japan, Kyoto, Osaka, and Edo. So what I find fascinating about all of the hanging scrolls in the exhibit, one is the color is so vivid. It's so intense. The patterning is absolutely exquisite. The juxtaposition of patterns, but also the detail and the fine brushwork. Like if you look around the edges of their foreheads, all those little hairs are painted on. But what I love about Hokusai's work, he always likes to put in surprises. And he loves dragons. I've always loved dragons. So when you go in and you look, very much detail on the sleeve of the one course in the front, you'll see this beautifully painted dragon on the sleeve. And also the juxtaposition of surfaces. So this is like a silver against these bright colors. So really pay attention to the scrolls because those are the unique things. Now these 2 tassels up top, I got in trouble because I was incorrect recently when I told someone that's what you use to tie up the scrolls back then. That's not true. And I'm not a Japanese art expert. I'm a contemporary artist expert. I work in contemporary art. That's my training. So this is all kind of new ground for me as well, working on the show. But those are actually decorative. They're intentional just to hang as decorative elements to help frame the work. And you'll see those on a lot of the scrolls in the exhibition as well. Now, this is going back a little bit from the first works that you saw in the show. Now, this is a good time to talk about the movements that happen in what's called the Ukiyo-e movement or the Ukiyo-e school. And what we looked at first were depictions of nature, and around that were also the city, which is popular. There was also a popular movement of the portrayal of beauties, right? Geisha and courtesans, like very beautiful that you would see in the pleasure districts in Edo. And there was a popular subject matter. So that's what you see with this portrait, Hokusai. And then also, not that 2 times, I think I have the date wrong on that one, but also there was a long tradition of portraying famous poets in the works as well. And the writing you see on these are poems as well that go along with the work. And then on all this, people always ask, like, what are these symbols on these? You'll see these stamps. These are the both the signatures and then the prints. It's also the mark of the publishers as well. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Thank you. So that's a great question. These are actually painted on silk, hand-painted silk, and then that would be mounted on different fabrics or backgrounds. So each scroll have a different. So think of this as very intentional framing. So like if you were in the US or Europe at the time, I'd do a very ornate gold frame to go with it. Here, they're really considering what surfaces it goes on, what is the material of those bands. That's all meant to create one piece. So that's actually painted, then mounted on the different materials. So it's some again, different silks, some different printed patterns or fabrics. Yeah. And it's wild because they're very fragile, right? They don't go out on display that often, and they didn't in their time as well. But they're just hanging by these little nails, right? So when we're installing the exhibit, what we had to do is all these cases we built just for this exhibition, right? Because they're so fragile, we don't want anyone touching them. They had to be in cases that were at least 30 centimeters, so it's about 13 inches, because anything closer, the static of the plexiglass might pull the scroll and it might fall off, so we had to make them deep. And then when you'll go and you'll see they actually all have their own lighting too, because the lighting has to be so low so it doesn't fade. So we actually build the bases with the conservator, with the installer, with our representatives from the museum in Italy, hang each scroll. And then those are single pieces of giant plexiglass that were then installed and then capped, sealed, and then the wiring going through. So it was a little strict. And because the design of that element of the whole exhibit changed 2 weeks before the show, because there were 7 pieces that all of a sudden could not be sent to us. So I had to change the whole layout, and we had to come up with and fabricate those in a week's time. The whole space has intense humidity control, yeah. Because again, it works on paper and silk, and it's very receptive to light, but also humidity and climate change. It has to stay pretty much right at 50% humidity level and close to a 70-degree weather. And it's tricky because like when it gets busy, bodies bring in humidity. So when you go through, you'll see little readers throughout and people checking them. That's what we're checking. And that's important because in the foreground here, we're seeing some of the oldest pieces in the show. These are scrolls from Miyagawa Koshun, and they are older. Someone's coming here talking about the revolution. These are from 1720, so over 300 years old. And this one portrays entertainment along the streets for the new year. Hand painted. These flat scrolls are meant to be seen sequentially. So they have different scenes. So it'd be rolled out and then you would show it. So it's like telling a story. All the scenes aren't on display, one because of space, but also that issue with light, right? These scrolls were shown in Rome last summer. This work has to rest. So that means the section that was shown, we could not show that section because it had to wait a number of years before it could be exposed to light again. Just to keep it safe and more to preserve it so someone 100 years from now could still see it, right? It's like why I always wear a hat, to keep this beautiful skin. I know you wanted to say something, it's fine. We all notice it, let's just accept it. Beautiful skin. But what this is showing a New Year's Eve day celebration, and a lot of the times there would be these open parades with musicians marching to the streets to celebrate holidays. But remember how I mentioned on the Hokusai's wave, the influence of Western space. And I said prior to that, there was a lot of stacked space, like floating space. I think it's very evident in these scrolls because we kind of know that this is in front of the figures and that's in the background, but they're all kind of floating because it's just the overlapping that tells us what's in front of the other. There's no linear perspective, right? There's no kind of spatial atmospheric perspective. They're just kind of floating in that space. So that's what I was referring to when I mentioned that. So oftentimes people will come in to the museum and they'll see these cabinets and they'll lean right on the plexi and start looking at it. And I just try to remind them, like, that's older than the Constitution. Please don't lean on it because I don't think you can afford it. So yes, we have people working there just in case. So it's not a real concern, but it's kind of a funny thing to say. Absolutely. That's a great idea. Thank you. Yeah, so all their own colors were mixed, right, by artists. And in fact, you can see these blues. What's so rare is that the blues are so rich in this painting. But again, it's a lot from this age, it's a lot of natural materials. The difference in these also the use of gold, though. So there's gold leaf in here as well. And anyone who knows about gold leaf, it's really hard to work with. It's very thin sheets of gold that are then adhered and then kind of the extras pulled away. So it's a beautiful piece. There's two of those scrolls you should see. Um, and then also we have a large number of objects on display also from that period. And one I want to highlight actually, you see in this case on the wall is a guitar, a shamisen, which I always say with a very heavy Midwestern accent, so excuse my pronunciation. But this goes back to our partners. And I'm going to spend the next section talking about how we got the show and then explain Ukiyo-e a little bit more. So this collection comes from the Kiyosone Museum, which is in Genoa, Italy. It is one of the largest collections of Japanese art and Asian art in the world, and definitely in Europe. They regularly loan work even back to Japan. And the museum was founded in 1901. And it was initially started and housed at the Art Academy in Genoa, and the collection was owned by the city of Genoa. But there was a villa on the campus of the Art Academy where the collection was housed and displayed. In 1942, Genoa is a port city in Italy. World War II is going on. The Allies are bombing Genoa regularly because it is a port of one of the Axis powers. So we were bombing Italy, right? And they were desperately trying to move the objects from the collection to preserve them. A lot of people would bring the art to their house, hide it under their bed, put it in their closets, try to save the work from, they didn't want to put it anywhere that would be identifiable or close to the ports, anywhere at danger. Most of the work was saved, but some was damaged not by the bombing, but by the haste in which it was being moved. So this guitar, like all guitars, has a stretched, in this case, a leather over the top of it, and it was damaged and ripped open. That was in 1942. The Kiyosone opened what is their permanent museum now in 1971. But this piece was not restored until this year, and it was specifically restored for this exhibition. So it has not been on public display since probably, if the early 40s, maybe late 30s, 1930s. And it has actually never even been on display in their current museum, which has been open since 1971. And this work, like all of the work in the show, is the first time it's ever traveled to the United States. So when you think of that in terms of the paintings or the objects, these have never been in the US. So we've had scholars come in who've never had a chance to look at these, like the head of Japanese art from the Boston Art Museum. We have someone coming from Kansas City. It's their first chance to study these works. But I find that story so fascinating, not only because the personal aspect, but the kind of full circle. Because in a way, we were responsible for its damage as we were fighting with Italy in World War II. And now, not that we personally, but now we've helped to restore this piece through this partnership that we have.
I've never seen anything like that.
These are not actual artworks, right? These are throughout. So the visual theme that I've used to tie in different aspects of the exhibition is this brushstroke. And these are images taken from Miyagawa Choshun's scroll, and they help to divide up the space. And in different parts of the exhibit, they also have gallery text on them. So we produce those. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. So I'll talk a little bit about the Ukiyo-e in a second. Some of the other first woodblock prints in the show are these by Utagawa Kunisada. A popular subject matter, and the ukiyo-e art was of actors from kabuki theater, which was very popular, and people would go to Edo, to Tokyo, to kind of go to theatrical experiences, and they wanted portrayals of some of the famous actors. And what I think, again, is so fascinating about this, remember what I told you about woodblock print? Each one of these hairs was carved into a block of wood to print that. And again, these are, you know, this size, so it's even more fine, you think. A lot of people think that these are really expressive, but those two actors looked exactly like that and always held those expressions. I'm just kidding. They're very, ukiyo is also known for being very expressive and dramatic. So they add a lot of emphasis to the figures, which also gives it that kind of comic or manga feeling as well. So where does this collection come from and how does it end up at the College of DuPage, the CCMA? So this is, you can see here I am with, this is Rosella. She is a curator who works independently in Italy. She is the one who organized this grouping of works from the Ukiyo-e Museum. She could not be at the opening because she was in Kyoto, I believe, or Japan for the World Expo, because she curated the presentation of work from the Vatican. And that's not unusual because the two figures on either side, Chiara and Chiara, are work for a company called Mondo Mostra. And Mondo Mostra is a company that helps to share the collections of Italian institutions and European institutions around the world. Prior to the early 90s, it was illegal in Italy for any non-state entity to organize the loan or presentation of national treasures. I don't know how he knew it was going to happen or what happened, but the owner of this company filed to open this company one day before that law changed. But consequently, they became one of the key brokers of work in Europe and partners on this exhibition. How did we meet them? Some of you may remember in 2021, we did the Frida Kahlo exhibition. That was from the Dolores Olmedo Museum in Mexico City. After our exhibition, the museum essentially shut down because the work was going on loan to the city of Mexico City to be on display for 40 years in a new museum they're constructing. So that's interesting that one, those works, Frida Kahlo works, the last time they'll be seen in the US for 40 years was in our space. But the sad part is some of our colleagues that we worked with on that project lost their jobs. And one of our key connections started to work with Mondo Mostra and introduced us to them. And that's how we found out about this collection and it was presented. But where does the work come from? And comes from the Ukiyo-e Museum. There's a Ukiyo-e Museum in Genoa, the one built in 1971, is a beautiful museum. The front is actually, these are actually all little windows. So the light kind of streams in, and then the inside is cantilevered floors with an open middle. It's a beautiful collection. There's over 15,000 works in their collection. And the Ukiyo-e collection is named after this man, Edoardo Ukiyo-e. He was an Italian artist, trained as an engraver. One of his first big jobs that made him famous is shortly after he graduated from the Art Academy in Genoa. He traveled Italy, creating etchings of famous artworks and locations. So not that different from Hiroshige, right? And then he took a job shortly after he actually took a job with a German company that helped, well, essentially they created banknotes. There was an engraving country that helped countries create very intricate banknotes and began to work for them. And Japan, in 1874, approached that country because one of the things that happened after Japan opened its borders in 1853 is they realized they weren't on the same they weren't behind the rest of the world, but they were kind of on different levels in certain things, right? And they wanted to kind of be on the same page as the rest of the world. And one area was currency. Prior to the late 1800s, all of the banknotes in Japan were still hand painted. So a few issues with that, right? One, counterfeiting might be a little easier. It's not very cost effective. It's not very fast. So if you have a growing population and you actually need a modern currency, there's only so fast you can bring those out. Or if you're a talented guy, have some paints in your basement, maybe you can whip some up too. So it's not the best possible way. So Kiyosone moved to Japan in 1874. He immediately fell in love with the country and the culture. And he also established himself as a very prominent figure, not only because he was responsible for the introduction of much of Japan's first kind of modern currency. So on the left, you'll see hand-painted currency that was prior to the time, and one of the first banknotes that Kiyosone produced for the country of Japan. So you see that the different level, this is much more in part of what we think of currency that we would maybe see in the 20th century, right? That is very much older than that. He also became very established not only for this, but as an artist in his own right. One of the only non-Japanese artists, actually the only non-Japanese artist ever to create a portrait of the emperor at the time. He remained in Japan the rest of his life, so for another 2 decades. And it was during that time that he amassed his collection of 15,000 works. Upon his passing, he left all the works to the city of Genoa as the ownership, with the stipulation that it would be housed in the art academy that trained him. And that's where it went. And as I said, it stayed there and was kind of this small collection that people didn't really know about. There was all of the struggles during World War II to preserve it. And in 1971, they opened this beautiful space where it's presented. But even at that point, there's a thing that us curators can do sometimes, is that we get very precious about things, right? It's like we love artworks or something so much, and we're so worried about them being interpreted wrong or damaged that we kind of build up barriers to actually accessing them. Because the more you see something, the more you act to it, the more likely it'll get damaged, and you can't imagine that. And for years at the Kiyosone, they had a curatorial staff that was like, it's great, but you have to come find us, and we're not going to let you know about it too much. It's kind of this precious little secret. The director of the museum now, Aurora, has been working to get the name of Kiyosone out there and share this collection with the world. And that's one of the reasons why our show is the first time that any part of the collection has traveled to the United States. So, but from the collection is this work, Ukiyo-e. And so you've seen the work, and I'm going backwards the whole way. But where does the name come from? People often ask. First of all, how do you say it? It's Ukiyo-e. And ki is key to pronunciation in the show because it's also Kiyosone. And it is woodblock prints and paintings from the 17th and 19th century, but specifically ones that are featured depicting the kind of world of Edo in the Edo period, which is from the early 1600s up until the mid to late 1800s. The literal translation of ukiyo-e is pictures of the floating world. And as I mentioned, it refers to the entertainment culture of Edo. It was popular because people wanted to either commemorate their time in that space or to celebrate it. Maybe they could never go themselves, but they wanted some visual image of it. It would be shared among people in a very intimate way. And it represented the pursuit of pleasures, of entertainment, of tourism. But the word is interesting because ukiyo, meaning the floating world, was actually originally a Buddhist term. And in Pure Land Buddhism, the idea is if you lived a very disciplined and chaste life, you would move on to the floating world, right? It was a reward for a life well lived. During this time of prosperity in the Edo period, a growing middle class, there grew this philosophy of why not enjoy the floating world now? right? Why wait, right? I think in America, sometimes we see that too, right? People have that mentality. And so the idea of the floating world transformed from meaning this world that you are rewarded with to kind of celebrating all the pleasures of life in the moment. And then ukiyo-e is pictures of that world. So if that makes more sense. So then if you go in the exhibition, it's broken down to portrayals of theater, music, and the performing arts. It's the first gallery, right? Then games. So you'll see actual games from the period, but also portrayal of games being played, playful games, beauties, portraits of the beauties, and then into images of city scenes in Edo, and then outside of the city, and some of the early ones, early pieces we saw. So that is what the name means and kind of how it's divided out throughout the show. And I mentioned its importance in influencing artists like Degas, Manet, Monet, Van Gogh, and Toulouse-Lautrec. We do also have 2 Toulouse-Lautrecs on display as part of this show. And probably most important to contemporary culture, its ongoing influence in manga and anime. So that's the collection.
Yeah, and the manga leads to anime, right? Which one guy who created the whole thing of the manga leads to anime.
That's right, because first the manga is the comic books, and eventually that transferred to cartoons and movies, which is animation. It's anime of the manga. Absolutely correct. So in addition to the presentation of the exhibit of the artworks and the contextual presentation, we also, with these exhibits, try to create different entry points to learn about experience and also have fun with the subject matter. So a few of the other ones we've created, as I mentioned, in the Playhouse Theater, our theater department have recreated this Edo village street scene. It's actually took them 3 months. There was probably 20 people working on it. If you want to learn more about this, we actually do a podcast for the museum, and I just interviewed the creators of this last week, and you can find that on Apple Podcasts or on our website, and they talk a lot about the process of building that. One interesting fact is they were really trying to find these ceiling roof tiles that were historically authentic, and they found real ones they could buy, but they weighed a ton. And the secret about not only would shipping have cost a fortune, but the secret in theatrical production is things are as strong as they need to be to stand up. All of a sudden you have a 4,000-pound roof, you have to build it to code, and that takes a lot longer, a lot more. So Rick Arnold, who works in our theaters, actually found that the movie house Warner Brothers has a vacuum form factory where they make plastic vacuum forms for set pieces for all their movies. And they actually had molds for historical Japanese roofs. And in fact, they were the same molds used in the film The Last Samurai. So that's what's used on the roofs of this space.
Japanese movies and anime.
Yeah. We also have from Warner Brothers some costumes from their films on display to show the different costumes of the period. We have a kids area where kids can do crafts. There's also an animated storytelling, the story of Hokusai. And then we have the story of the evolution of manga and anime from the early Edo period with Hokusai all the way to contemporary times. And this was done in collaboration with 2 designers from 2D Restaurant in Chicago. That their restaurant kind of has this look like it is a giant comic book. So you walk into the Playhouse Theater, and that space feels like you're walking into a comic book telling the story.
So there is no photography in that exhibit, but
No, that one you can take as many photos as you want. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And then when you walk in, you get a Eki stamp book. So at each space of the exhibition, you can get a stamp that were made custom for our show to show you're there. And then it also continues where you can get stamps in different parts of DuPage County, including in Elmhurst. And speaking of Elmhurst and other villages in DuPage, we try to, with all our exhibits, engage the community. And one thing we did is collaborate with artists Rich Lowe on the creation of a one-of-a-kind works representing landmarks and areas throughout DuPage County in a style similar to ukiyo-e. So I believe he did 11 prints in Elmhurst. Is that correct? Yeah. So So there are 11 in town here, and we have on display at the exhibit one example from each town that you can see, and there's also a booklet that you can get that has all of them in there as well. That's wallpaper that's created from his sketches. We wanted to integrate it somehow, so I went into the Dropbox and found his sketches and just quickly made a wallpaper to throw them on. And there you see an example from Glen Ellen. Now there's a lot of aspects that go into a project like this, and they're fun to learn about. So we have also tried to share as much as that information, not only through talks like this. Here you're looking at a scale model of the lobby that was made months before the actual one. Do you see how we planned and how it translated? So that's like a 1/10 scale of the lobby. We saw some of the early sketches before. Sorry, I'm having a little problem with this clicker. There are a lot of interesting stories about how a show like this goes up. And if you want to learn them, I'm going to stay on top of these stories. We're sharing them regularly. One, on our we have a podcast you can find on Apple Podcasts or other sources, or you can go to the ccma.org/Clevecast. Each week we interview different people involved with the show. Follow us on all the social media. We've been doing a lot of reels and posts about the creation of the show and different in-depth looks at different pieces. So it's a great way to learn about more. And then also on the site, the ccma.org or hokusai2025.org, there's a lot of resources, including information on all of the programming that is happening, not only at our space, in which there is a large amount of programming. Last week we had a Japan Fest that, even though it was so hot, we had over 1,300 people come out to the museum. It was a great event. There was free performances. There's free woodblock printing sessions. There are different lectures and talks. And a lot of those are free, or if you come to the exhibit and keep your ticket, you can go to any of them later, and that ticket will get you free access to them. We also have a full listing of all the community projects happening throughout DuPage County, including at the library here in Elmhurst, and all the events associated with the Beautiful Cities project. And in fact, with all the participating communities from the Beautiful Cities project, we have a special deal where there is a code that you can use as members of the Elmhurst community to get a 2-for-1 ticket price admission to the show. And do you have that code? Yeah. So she can share that code with you. So if you're thinking about going, make sure to use that as a way to thank all the communities for really working with us on this project. Yeah.
It could be used for next event, like party, right?
If you go to the show and want to go to like a lecture that's a week later, you can just show them your ticket from when you went and you can go to the lecture.
You can have one again or not?
There'll be another festival in the fall. Yeah, and that'll be free. Yeah, so if you go to the website, you'll see it. The show's up through the 21st of September. Please check out the website for all that information. I'm sorry, I've already gone 10 minutes over time. But if there's any questions, I can answer a couple, or you all want to get out into the thunderstorm. Sure. So the first website is hokusai2025.org. Yeah. And the question in the back.
I just wanted to ask how the silk prints and the wood blocks were preserved for like that amount of time.
Well, one is that they are not regularly shown. They're not just out, right? So they're rolled up, often rolled up. And when they were originally made, they were even just unrolled on special occasions. So even when they were originally shown. And then once they went to the museum, they were often, treated as these objects. So you had people in the museum who were very conscious about preserving them and only showing them under a certain level of light and things like that. But it's a constant aspect, and it's a kind of a big concern that's always in the back of my head. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. My question is maybe how many people have been employed, artists employed in this endeavor, and because it just seems like such an incredible project So I was wondering if you have a ballpark figure.
Um, it's largely done just by existing staff at the art center. So when you think about the exhibition, when we do these shows, I bring on an installer. So like in the not as many as you think is what I'll say. A lot of the staff, but I would say we've probably brought on 6 to 8 outside people to help in different areas. So you have the people helping with the 2D. I know in the theater section, they brought in scene painters and set designers. But a lot of it's us. Like I have photos of me up on a scaffolding hanging that wallpaper, like working the table saw. That's just kind of the mentality that we have there. And there's a lot of talented people that work in all aspects of the art center, and people who are willing to willing to roll up their sleeves. So like my boss Diana, she'll be in there hanging stuff as well. It's not this mentality like, no, I don't do that. It's like we have to get this done. So. Thank you. Well, I'll take one more question then.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
I was there last weekend.
Okay.
You need to be commended.
Oh,
It's phenomenal.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll take that comment. Thank you. It's good to hear. And I tell my therapist I try to accept positively. So, all right.
We have
One last
online
one. Sorry.
question also. Sorry. I'm gonna bring it to you also. They want to know if any of the woodblocks still exist.
Oh, the original ones where these shows no longer exist. They've kind of lost. There are still woodblocks from the period that still do, but there's an interesting video on the show of how the process works, and you really see how much they rub on that ink, so they get worn down. And then you also think back to the preservation period. If there are, because of the way they thought about them, they didn't think of those as fine as art, right? As tools. So they weren't maybe preserved in the way. So with that same change on them. And I think if someone found the original wave woodblock, it would be a major show somewhere. So, but I could be wrong on some of those. Again, I'm not totally my training. So
So this is the last question here.
I was curious, what kind of wood did they use?
oh, the ones is cherry wood. Yeah. Yes. Which makes sense, right? Because it has to withstand a lot of that. So some of them use MDF, but that doesn't work as well. It's another bad joke. I apologize. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming out.